Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a trauma surgeon moves to a quiet suburb, he expects peace, not to be zip-tied, assaulted, and nearly stopped from saving a life. But when petty power meets real urgency, one man's fight against an overreaching HOA turns into a viral courtroom-shaking battle for justice. I never really cared about homeowners associations. To me, they were just those invisible bureaucratic beasts you heard about from disgruntled retirees on local news segments, people who got fined for flying the wrong flag or painting their shutters the wrong shade of beige. My wife joked once that I'd last 5 minutes in a place like that before getting myself excommunicated. I didn't argue. I figured as long as I stayed out of their business, they'd stay out of mine. Simple. But as I've learned the hard way, nothing is ever simple when there's a Karen involved. We moved to Heather Glen at the end of April, after 15 years in downtown Seattle. The hospital where I work is still in the city, but my wife craved quiet. And I'll admit, the idea of our daughter growing up where she could actually hear birds instead of sirens had its appeal. So we found a home in this tucked-away suburb about 45 minutes out, still close enough for my on-call schedule, but far enough that the stars actually showed up at night. It was perfect, or at least it looked that way. Our house sat on the edge of a long L-shaped road that connected to the main highway. It wasn't gated, it wasn't private, but most people avoided it unless they lived here. Every morning, I'd cut through the development that made up Heather Glen Phase to reach the highway. It shaved a good 12 to 15 minutes off my commute, especially if traffic backed up. That stretch of road was technically under HOA jurisdiction, but again, I wasn't part of the HOA. Our deed made that clear. The development began 2 blocks down. My lot, like a few others nearby, was technically adjacent, but we weren't bound by their covenants, conditions, or whatever they called their commandments. I assumed that was the end of the story, and for a while, it was. Life was calm. I started planting tomatoes on the weekend like some suburban monk, joined my daughter's school PTA, regrettably, and started getting to know a few of the neighbors, most of whom were perfectly pleasant, if occasionally robotic in their admiration for lawn fertilizer. A couple of them, however, gave me that friendly yet hesitant look, especially when they brought up the HOA. One guy, Doug, made a joke about the president of the association being a cross between Mussolini and Martha Stewart. I laughed, thinking it was just a joke. The first official interaction with the HOA came by mail, a neatly folded brochure inviting me to join the Heather Glen Community Standards Council. There was even a welcome basket on the porch, fruit, cookies, and a branded pen that leaked. I tossed it all except the cookies. I ignored the next 2 invitations, not out of spite, just because I had zero interest. I work 60-hour weeks. I don't have time to attend color palette reviews or lawn compliance meetings. One Saturday morning, though, the HOA came to me, in person. I was just finishing up some work on the garden fence when I heard a purposeful pair of footsteps on gravel. I turned around to see a woman in her late 40s, sharp bob, navy blazer, clipboard, marching up my driveway like she'd been summoned by God and GPS. "Good morning," she chirped, in a tone that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "You must be Daniel Hawkins." "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" She didn't smile so much as bare her teeth. "I'm Karen West, president of the Heather Glen HOA. I just wanted to introduce myself and personally welcome you to the community." I extended a gloved hand. "Thanks. I appreciate it." She glanced at the fence behind me, then scribbled something on the clipboard. "Beautiful work on that trellis. We actually have guidelines for visible outdoor structures, heights, materials, stain color. Would love to get you a copy." "That's kind, but I'm not part of the HOA." A pause. Her smile returned, stiffer now. "Oh, I know. But sometimes non-members choose to opt in for the shared benefits. Architectural consistency, neighborhood cohesion, things like that." "Right, I think I'm good for now." Her eyes scanned my front lawn like a security drone. "You use the Phase A2 exit to the highway, right?" That gave me pause. "Yeah, it's the fastest route. Most residents do. It's one of the reasons we try to regulate late-night traffic. Sound carries." "But I suppose your job makes that unavoidable," she said, job. Like it tasted sour. I nodded. "I'm a trauma surgeon at Harborview. I'm on call a few nights a week. Emergencies don't schedule themselves." Karen nodded, but something about her expression shifted. I don't know what it was. Too smooth, too practiced. She thanked me for my time and left with the kind of smile you give a dog before you slam the screen door in its face. After that, things were quiet again. The mailers stopped. No more invitations. No more surprise visits. I thought maybe she got the hint. Honestly, I didn't give her another thought. If anything, I was relieved. If only I'd known that she wasn't giving up. She was circling. Because while I was patching up gunshot victims and performing emergency surgeries, Karen West was running surveillance, logging my comings and goings, flagging my use of private roads, and documenting my supposed non-compliance with rules I wasn't even subject to. But I wouldn't realize that for another 5 months. At that moment, all I knew was that I'd found a home, peaceful, private, and finally mine. I had no idea I'd soon be lying zip-tied on the asphalt while a man in a security vest laughed in my face. I don't remember the exact time I got the call. It was past 1 in the morning, somewhere between the tail end of REM sleep and that dream where I'm always late to med school finals. My phone buzzed once, then again, until the vibration practically threw it off the nightstand. I picked up, and even before I saw the caller ID, I knew what it was. The hospital only called like that for one reason. Dr. Hawkins. The nurse's voice was sharp, alert. Multiple vehicle collision on Interstate 90. We've got a female mid-30s inbound with suspected thoracic trauma. Or 2 is prepping. You're needed immediately. On my way, I said, already grabbing jeans and a black hoodie off the floor. I brushed my teeth in record time, splashed my face with water, kissed my wife on the forehead. She stirred but didn't wake, and slipped out into the night. The air outside was damp and quiet. There were no stars, just the heavy suburban cloud cover that pressed down like a thick ceiling. My car, a dark blue sedan that had seen more blood than most ambulances, started up with its usual tired hum. Every second counted. If I drove the normal way, out past the traffic circle, then onto the freeway, it would take at least 40 minutes. But if I cut through Heather Glen Phase 2, I could be on the highway in under 25. I'd done this a dozen times before, day or night. I never sped through the neighborhood like a maniac, just quick and focused. Nobody had ever stopped me. Nobody had ever cared. Until that night. I was maybe 4 houses into the HOA zone when I saw them. 2 figures in bright yellow vests standing in the middle of the road. Like this was a military checkpoint and not a sleepy cul-de-sac full of matching mailboxes. They had reflective bands, radios clipped to their belts, and that slow, rehearsed posture of men who wanted to be cops but didn't make the cut. I slowed the car, lowered the window. One of them stepped forward, a buzz cut with a clipboard. "Evening, sir. You a resident of Heather Glen?" I resisted the urge to say, "Do I look like I have time for this?" Instead, I gave him what I thought was the simplest answer. "No, I live on the edge of Glenwood Street. I'm a surgeon. I'm on call. I've got an emergency in the city. I need to get to the freeway." He didn't blink. "Roads closed to non-residents between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. for noise compliance. Can't let you through." I stared at him. "I don't think you understand. A patient's life is literally on the line. Every second I sit here, she's bleeding out." "The HOA has rules," he said, folding his arms. I leaned in, gripping the steering wheel. "And I'm not in your damn HOA. I'm just passing through." The second guy, taller, heavier, with a look that said he loved this way too much, stepped to the side of my door. "License and registration." "No," I snapped. "I'm not being detained. You're not law enforcement. You're not even mall security." That was apparently the trigger. Tall guy yanked my door open, grabbed my arm, and before I could react, pulled me out of the car and onto the pavement. My right shoulder hit first, then my knee. I grunted from the impact, but instinct kept me from lashing out, because the second I resisted, I knew this would escalate fast. "You're not going anywhere," the tall one growled. "We saw your car speeding on camera earlier tonight. You were going at least 35. That's reckless. We already called the cops." My hands were being zip-tied behind my back now, one of those industrial plastic ones they hand out at gun shows and political rallies. The buzz-cut guy rummaged in the front of my car, muttering something about non-compliance, then popped the hood. I heard the snip of wire cutters. Then again. "Are you insane?" I shouted. "I'm a doctor. This is a medical emergency." The big one leaned down and slapped me, not hard enough to knock me out, just enough to humiliate me. "Should have followed the rules, Doc." I saw him lift a baton. Where the hell did they get batons? And he brought it down on my front bumper twice. The sound was sharp and final. Somewhere in the background, a car alarm went off, probably someone else's. Not mine. Mine was dead now. I tried to get up, but one of them pressed a knee into my back. I could feel the grit of the asphalt grinding into my cheek. I was breathing hard through my nose. They had duct taped my mouth after I shouted again. I lay there, in the dark, for what must have been 20 minutes. I wasn't counting. Time slowed to that surreal molasses pace that only kicks in during surgeries and trauma scenes. I thought of the woman being wheeled into the OR, maybe conscious, maybe not. I imagined my name being called in that cold, clean hallway, and no one answering. And all because two assholes with vests thought they were traffic gods. They stood over me, chatting casually. I remember the tall one lighting a cigarette and laughing. The smell made my stomach turn. My wrists ached. My shirt was soaked through. Somewhere off in the distance, I heard sirens. Finally. And, still, part of me knew. It was already too late. The red and blue flash behind my eyelids felt like a hallucination at first. I wasn't sure if the police had finally arrived, or if my brain was doing that thing where it tries to comfort you with imaginary rescues. But then, I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel, the crackle of a radio, and a clipped voice bark out, "Step away from him. Now!" The pressure on my back lifted. I didn't move immediately. My muscles had locked up, and my shoulders were screaming. I opened one eye. Two officers in full uniform were approaching fast, one of them drawing his flashlight and aiming it straight at the tall guy with the baton. Buzzcut raised both hands like he was auditioning for a hostage scene. "He was trespassing," he started, puffing up his chest. "We caught him speeding. This is HOA property. He was threatening us." The second officer moved toward me, crouching low. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell happened here?" He reached behind my head and gently removed the duct tape from my mouth. The rush of cold air into my throat made me gag. I tried to sit up, but my arms were still tied. "I'm a trauma surgeon," I rasped. "Harborview Medical Center. I got called in. A woman was in a crash. I tried to go through this road, same one I always use. They stopped me, tied me up, cut my car." The officer looked at the security guys. "You did this." He was aggressive. Buzzcut said quickly, "Refused to follow HOA protocol. We have rules about non-resident traffic after dark." He sped through the development. "We have it on video." "You're not law enforcement," the cop snapped. "You don't detain people. You sure as hell don't assault them. Turn around, hands behind your back. Now." Buzzcut froze. The tall one tried to talk, but the officer raised his voice again. "I said now." The pair reluctantly complied, and before long they were standing handcuffed by the squad car, looking significantly less smug than they had 15 minutes ago. The officer who helped me called for EMS backup and backup units, then gently cut the zip ties from my wrists. The plastic had sliced into my skin. Blood beaded up along my forearms. I didn't care. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I can run," I said hoarsely, "if you get me to a car." "Hold on," he said, already radioing his partner. "Did you catch the call from dispatch about the wreck on I-90? That a woman was being brought into Harborview?" "Yeah," his partner responded. "That's this guy. He's the surgeon." The officer looked at me again. "You still able to operate?" "Absolutely." He nodded. "Come on." He walked me over to the second patrol car. The engine was still running. I got in the front passenger seat, ignoring the pain in my shoulders, my back, my wrists. It was adrenaline now, pure and uncut. The officer floored it. Sirens screamed to life, and we tore through the development, past the very checkpoint where they had dragged me out of my own car. As we drove, I turned and saw the HOA sign on the corner. "Private community. Respect our rules." I almost laughed. Almost. I turned to the officer. "Those cameras they mentioned, can you get access to all of them?" He gave me a sidelong glance. "We're already working on it. If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, they're in deep. That wasn't protocol. That was false imprisonment. Could be worse, depending on the DA." I nodded slowly. I couldn't think straight. My mind was already at the hospital, the OR, the team. The woman bleeding out while I was zip-tied in a neighborhood speed trap, run by people with name badges and zero self-awareness. The officer's voice brought me back. "Try to breathe, Doc. You'll be there in less than 15. I stared out of the windshield, the highway lights whipping past. "She better be alive," I said. I didn't say who I meant. By the time we reached the hospital, my body was running on muscle memory and spite. I don't remember walking into the OR. I don't remember changing into scrubs. I vaguely remember one of the nurses trying to check my pulse and muttering something about, "You look like hell, Doc." The rest was a blur of clamps, retractors, adrenaline, and sharp clarity that comes only when someone's life is on the edge and you're the last person standing between them and death. It was just over an hour later when I finally peeled off my gloves and stepped out of the OR, blood smeared and soaked through with sweat. I remember leaning against the wall outside the surgical suite, suddenly aware of the dull, burning pain in my wrists. The nurse who'd scrubbed in with me offered a bottled water and a towel. I thanked her, but didn't say much. My mind was already somewhere else. When I got back home that morning, I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd sipped coffee and ignored HOA mailers, and called a lawyer. His name was Ray Murdoch. Mid-50s, blunt, ex-prosecutor, the kind of guy who didn't waste time asking if I wanted justice or revenge. "We'll aim for both," he said after I described what had happened. "But I need evidence, not just your bruises." That's when I remembered the cameras. Ray filed an emergency request for access to all HOA surveillance footage from the night of the incident. Normally, that would have required a court order, but the responding officers had already opened a preliminary investigation. Thanks to that, the footage was considered material evidence, and we had every right to view it. 2 days later, Ray called me, voice tight with disbelief. "Dan, you better come see this in person." I met him at his office. He already had the clips queued up. We watched the recording from the fixed-angle camera mounted on a street lamp facing the Phase Thadar 2 entry point. The quality wasn't great, but clear enough to see me driving into the neighborhood. My headlights flash across the screen. The guards are already standing there, waiting. "They were out there 30 seconds before you even turned onto the street," Ray said. Like they knew. Then came the footage of the altercation. No sound, but the video spoke loud enough. One guard yanked open my car door. Another moved in from behind. The struggle. Me on the pavement. Duct tape. Wire cutters. Batons. The whole ugly truth, framed in grayscale surveillance footage. "They told police you were aggressive," Ray muttered. "But you never once raised a hand." Then he showed me something else. Recordings from the past few weeks. Archived camera logs. The same 2 guards on multiple nights. Standing on the same corner. Between midnight and 3 a.m. Always on weekends. "She had them staked out," Ray said. This wasn't a spontaneous thing. We dug deeper. Turns out the HOA logs, yes, they kept digital logs, showed repeated incidents marked under my name. Complaints filed about my car being too loud, about reckless driving, even one bizarre entry citing unauthorized passage after sunset. None of those reports were ever sent to me. No one knocked on my door, no notices. Just internal documentation, like someone was building a case. "She was tracking me," I said, "trying to provoke something." Ray nodded. "It's a classic setup. Create a paper trail so that when the hammer drops, you look like the villain." "And I bit," I muttered. "No," Ray corrected me. "You got ambushed." That's not the same thing. As we were wrapping up, Ray's assistant stepped in and said a detective had called back. The HOA president, Karen West, was declining to voluntarily release all files. She claimed some of the footage had been automatically purged due to storage limitations. Ray just smiled. "You know what that means? That she's hiding something? That she's scared." We filed a formal motion that afternoon, and the detective assigned to the case started knocking on doors. That's when it really began, when the spotlight turned. But in that quiet moment, standing outside the lawyer's office, I had one of those awful realizations that creep in sideways. This wasn't about a speed limit. It wasn't about noise. It was personal. And Karen West had been planning it long before I ever knew her name. I didn't plan for the story to go public. I didn't call a reporter or post anything online. All I wanted was to handle it through the courts, quietly, cleanly. Let the facts speak. Let the law do its job. But Heather Glenn didn't exist in a vacuum, and bruises, real ones, don't stay private for long. It started with a single email. One of the younger cops who responded to the scene, Officer Ramirez, apparently had a brother who freelanced for a local news blog. The footage from the security camera, the one that showed me being yanked from my car and zip-tied on the pavement, had been entered into evidence. And someone, bless them or damn them, I still haven't decided, leaked it. 3 days later, I woke up to a headline on my phone. "Surgeon assaulted by HOA guards while en route to save woman's life." At first I laughed. It felt like a fake headline from The Onion. But then I scrolled down and saw the actual footage embedded in the article. Grainy, choppy, no sound, but unmistakable. Me, in my hoodie, my face hitting the asphalt, the tape being slapped across my mouth. Within 24 hours, it had 200,000 views. By the end of the week, over 3 million. There were hashtags, Let the Doctor Drive, HOA Hell, Karen Justice. People started tagging the mayor, the hospital, even the governor. News vans parked outside the Heather Glen entrance. I came home one night to find 2 teenagers from a high school journalism club standing on my lawn with a microphone and a ring light. Ray called me during all this and asked, "You ready to be famous, Doc?" I didn't ask for any of this. Fame doesn't care. Talk shows started calling. Some anchor from a national cable network wanted to fly me to New York. I declined. I wasn't trying to become a martyr. I had patience, rounds, a job. But that didn't stop the machine. Online sleuths began digging into Karen West. Turns out, she wasn't just the president of the HOA. She was the founder. She'd written the entire covenant herself back in the late 90s. The bylaws were a Frankenstein of power trip language and passive-aggressive threats, and she'd been wielding them like weapons ever since. One Reddit user found a scanned PDF from 3 years ago. Karen had tried to sue a neighbor for planting unapproved tulips too close to a shared fence. She lost. Badly. Memes followed. There was one of her face photoshopped onto a dictator's uniform with the caption, "Obey or get zip-tied." Another showed me holding a scalpel like a lightsaber with Karen in the background, red-eyed, holding a clipboard like a Sith holocron. It was ridiculous. And yet somehow it helped, because public pressure works faster than lawyers. Under the weight of the backlash, the city council issued a statement condemning unlawful detentions by private organizations. Local politicians started calling for regulation of HOAs, especially those with self-enforced security details. The hospital issued its own statement backing me fully. My department chair called me into his office and shook my hand like I'd just brought down a cartel. Even the nurses started treating me differently. I caught them glancing at me in the halls, whispering, giggling. One of them called me Dr. John Wick. I'm pretty sure that was meant as a compliment. Meanwhile, Karen West did what petty tyrants always do when the mob comes knocking. She tried to play victim. A video surfaced of her standing on her porch, holding a trembling Pomeranian, complaining about the cyberbullying campaign against her. She claimed the footage was doctored, accused me of orchestrating a public smear campaign, and even implied I had faked the emergency call to gain sympathy. Ray and I watched the clip in his office. He rewound it 3 times. "She really just said you staged a near-fatal car accident to get Twitter points," he muttered. "I've seen meth heads in court make more convincing arguments." The public didn't buy it either. The more she spoke, the worse she looked. Every interview, every shaky press release, every word screamed panic. And while she melted down in front of cameras, our case gained momentum. Witnesses came forward, neighbors, former HOA members, even an ex-security contractor who claimed Karen instructed him to intimidate non-compliant residents. Ray filed a formal civil suit. The charges: false imprisonment, destruction of private property, assault, obstruction of emergency services. But the kicker? We added a federal count for violating EMTALA laws, interfering with the delivery of emergency medical care. Now, it wasn't just civil, it was criminal. As all of this swirled, I still went to work, still scrubbed in, still saved lives. But now I had people stopping me in elevators, patients' families hugging me in lobbies, strangers sending thank you notes. Some even dropped off cookies. And every time I walked past that stretch of road where I was dragged from my car, I thought, they tried to make me invisible. And now the whole damn country was watching. The courthouse was packed. I didn't expect that. I thought we'd be in some dull, beige-walled room with humming fluorescents and a sticky floor. But no, they moved the hearing to a larger courtroom to accommodate the press and public spectators. The bailiff looked like he was ready for a riot, and every third person had a smartphone in hand, already streaming. Ray leaned over to me as we walked toward the defendant's table and whispered, "Don't smile. Makes you look smug." I wasn't smiling. I hadn't smiled in weeks. Karen West sat across the room, surrounded by a trio of HOA-funded lawyers who looked like they'd been assembled by a central casting director for smarmy legal team. She wore a pale blue blazer and that thin, bitter smile she always used when pretending to be reasonable. Her face had the smug tightness of someone who'd spent the morning convincing herself that the world was still on her side. The judge entered, and the room hushed. What followed was a slow, surgical dismantling of everything Karen thought she controlled. The prosecution laid out the charges: unlawful detainment, assault, property damage, interference with emergency services. Then came the witnesses. First were the police officers who responded the night of the incident. One testified how they found me zip-tied on the ground, with my mouth taped shut. Another confirmed the guards were acting under direct verbal instruction from Ms. West, according to their own body cam audio. Then came the medical dispatch logs showing the call from Harborview and the urgency of the trauma case I had been called to handle. My hospital administrator testified next, visibly rattled. She described the risk involved when an emergency surgeon is delayed even minutes. "This could have cost a life," she said. "He arrived just in time. Had he not, well, we wouldn't be here discussing civil liability. We'd be talking about a fatality." Karen's lawyers tried to push back, calling the HOA guards overzealous volunteers and suggesting the situation spiraled due to confusion. They floated the idea that I had refused to identify myself or exacerbated the confrontation. But then Ray brought out the footage. All of it, unedited. Every second of me calmly explaining the situation, trying to leave, being pulled from my car, bound and battered, the guards cursing, the wire cutters, my body hitting the ground. When the big screen showed one of them kneeling on my back while laughing, you could hear the air leave the room. But the real nail in the coffin was the testimony of Greg Russo. Greg was one of the two guards who assaulted me. He looked like hell, clean-shaven but hollow-eyed, like the weight of his own stupidity had finally crushed him. He was there under subpoena, but he'd already made a deal: partial immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Under oath, he said the words I'd been waiting to hear. "Ms. West told us to stop him. She said he needed to be taught a lesson, that he thought he was better than the rest of us. She told us to hold him if he resisted, and she'd handle the rest." You could feel the shift. Karen stopped smiling. Her fingers curled around the armrest like claws. Her lawyers started whispering like poker players with a losing hand. Greg went on. He described how Karen had sent emails instructing the guards to monitor Dr. Hawkins's patterns, noting when he usually leaves for work, and to watch for infractions. Ray submitted copies of those emails. The timestamps were damning. The intent was obvious. By the time the court adjourned for lunch, the media had already declared it a bloodbath. Karen's press agent, yes, she had one, refused comment. Her lawyers tried to regroup, but they looked like they were already measuring the depth of the hole. Then Karen did something so absurd, so desperate, I almost admired the sheer audacity of it. She filed a countersuit. Right there in the courthouse, her team submitted paperwork claiming emotional distress, public humiliation, and irreparable damage to her reputation. She argued that I had weaponized social media to incite harassment, and that I was intentionally provoking public animosity for personal gain. The judge stared at the filing like it smelled bad. He asked her legal team one question: did your client, or did she not, instruct private individuals to detain a man en route to perform life-saving surgery? The lead attorney muttered something about pending verification, and the judge cut him off, dismissed, without merit, borderline contemptuous. And just like that, Karen's last card burned to ash in her hand. By the end of the week, the court ruled in my favor on all counts. The guards were convicted. Greg got a lighter sentence, but still served time. The other, 3 years. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president, fined, banned from serving on any association board again, and the HOA itself. Well, that came next. They took down the HOA sign 3 days after the verdict. I watched them do it. 2 guys in fluorescent vests, real city workers this time, not the cosplay enforcers Karen had hired, unscrewed the green metal plaque from its spot at the Heather Glen entrance and slid it into the back of a truck. One of them paused, looked at the sign, and muttered something I couldn't hear. The other one laughed. I stood across the street sipping coffee, wrapped in a hoodie and sunglasses like some local celebrity trying not to be noticed, which, of course, only made me more obvious. A neighbor I barely knew drove by and honked. Another jogged past and gave me a thumbs up. Everything had changed. After the trial, residents started showing up at city council meetings in droves, not just from Heather Glen, but from nearby neighborhoods too. People were angry, not just because of what happened to me, but because Karen had been allowed to wield that much unchecked authority for so long. Homeowners who once nodded politely now brought documentation, testimony, receipts. Stories surfaced about quiet harassment, extortionate fines, selective enforcement of bylaws. One elderly couple revealed that Karen had fined them weekly for unapproved holiday decor because they kept a ceramic gnome on their porch. A gnome. In America, that momentum turned into action. A petition to dissolve the Heather Glen HOA went up online. Within 72 hours, it had over 4,000 signatures, more than double the number of actual residents. The city, now under pressure from media, residents, and the public at large, initiated a full audit of the HOA's finances, leadership elections, and security contracts. What they found was a mix of sloppiness, back-channel favoritism, and more than one shady invoice tied to a company coincidentally owned by Karen's cousin. The association board resigned one by one. The treasurer skipped town. The secretary lawyered up. And Karen, she stayed. For a little while, after being banned from serving on any HOA in the state, she clung to what power she had left like a drowning cat holding a chunk of driftwood. She stopped speaking to reporters, boarded up her windows, canceled her gardening club. She filed 3 noise complaints in 1 week against the same house for excessively joyful wind chimes. Then came the for sale sign on her lawn. I saw her one last time standing at the curb in a pantsuit, watching a moving truck load the last of her furniture. We made eye contact. She didn't wave. She didn't scowl. She just stared, frozen, exhausted, defeated, and still. I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance. It was a system, and systems don't die easy. But this one, this particular brand of petty tyranny, had finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. Heather Glen slowly started to feel like a real neighborhood again. People began painting their mailboxes whatever damn color they wanted. Kids left scooters on the sidewalk without getting anonymous warning letters. A guy down the street installed solar panels without submitting a reflective surface mitigation proposal. Wild, I know. One weekend, someone even organized a block party. No forms, no fees, just people laughing, sharing food, letting kids run in the sprinklers. I didn't speak much that day, just listened, took it all in. At some point, an older woman approached me. I didn't recognize her. She held a paper plate with 2 cupcakes and handed one to me. "You didn't just fight back," she said. "You reminded the rest of us that we could." I nodded, unsure what to say. She smiled. "Next time someone tells you you're not part of the community, just remember, you changed it more than they ever did." 6 months later, I got a check in the mail. It wasn't a surprise. The court had ruled in my favor, and Ray said it would come eventually. After insurance battles, HOA asset seizures, and whatever legal alchemy they used to turn Karen's empire into financial restitution. But still, when I opened the envelope and saw 7 figures spelled out in ink, I just sat there in silence. $1 million. I wasn't expecting that much. I didn't sue for money. Honestly, I would have taken an apology. But what I got was something better. Recognition. Not just from the court or the press or the thousands of strangers who tweeted, "Let the doctor drive," like it was a protest chant, but from the system itself. A formal legal acknowledgement that what happened to me was wrong. I showed the check to my wife. She looked at the number, then looked at me and said, "Can we finally get that espresso machine?" We didn't change much. Paid off the mortgage. Replaced my battered car. Took a long overdue vacation to the Oregon coast. But for the most part, life returned to normal. Work, family, quiet evenings. Except now, the quiet felt different. It wasn't forced. It wasn't patrolled by HOA volunteers wielding flashlights and clipboards. It was real. Heather Glen became an open community. No board, no dues, no covenants, just neighbors. Some of them still planted matching flowers. Others didn't. A few even started a community forum online, not to regulate things, but to offer help. Need a ladder? Someone's got one. Looking for a babysitter? Post here. No power structure, no forced unity, just people being people. One afternoon, I got a call from a local university asking if I'd be willing to speak at a seminar about civic overreach and private authority. I declined. I'd had enough of being a symbol. But I did donate part of the settlement to a legal aid group that helps homeowners fight abusive HOA practices. They sent me a thank you card signed by 24 families I've never met. Karen never resurfaced, not publicly. Word is she moved to Arizona, probably joined another HOA, probably running it by now, but it's out of my hands. I don't think about her anymore. What I do think about is the woman whose life I saved that night. I never met her afterward. HOA, boundaries, all that. But I check the hospital's follow-up report sometimes. She made a full recovery. No complications. Back to work. Just another line in a file. And yet, every time I read it, I remember the weight of the duct tape on my mouth, the sting of asphalt against my cheek, and the cold, impotent rage of knowing that I was being blocked from doing the one thing I was meant to do. That night could have ended differently, worse, for both of us. But it didn't. It ended with the guards in prison, Karen disgraced, a community rebuilt from the ground up, and a woman alive, not because of vengeance, not because of violence, but because sometimes the only way to fight madness is with clarity, with patience, with truth. So now, when I walk through the neighborhood in the evening and see porch lights flickering on, dogs barking, kids riding bikes past fences that no longer require uniformity in design, I just smile. Nobody tells me where I can drive anymore. And if they tried, they'd better pack a lunch.